G'day, Dave here. I'd like to read to you from a song by Australian songwriter Paul Kelly. It's called You Can't Take It With You. It says you might have a happy family, nice house, fine car. You might be successful in real estate. You could even be a football star. You might have a primetime TV show seen in every home and bar, but you can't take it with you. You might own a great big factory, oil wells on sacred land. You might be in line for promotion with a foolproof retirement plan. You might have your money in copper, textiles or imports from Japan, but you can't take it with you. You can't take it with you, though you might pile it up high. It's so much easier for a camel to pass through a needle's eye. Quite profound words from Paul Kelly, words that reflect the Bible. In fact, with that last sentence about the camel and the needle's eye, we have words straight from Jesus himself. Thank you for joining with us. We're actually looking at wisdom from the book of Ecclesiastes, and the writer Solomon is looking at the nature of life. He's assessing what people do as we live our lives here under the sun to try and work out what matter, to try and work out what's really important. And he's examining the question of wealth and whether the meaning of life is tied up with the many things that we might accumulate for ourselves. I think it was Malcolm Forbes who had this famous saying, which I remember seeing on a t-shirt. It said, "He who dies with the most toys wins." And you think, okay, right, you've got a lot of toys, what do you win? And there was another t-shirt somebody actually gave to me that said, "He who dies with the most toys still dies." Maybe closer to the truth. Well, we're going to look at Ecclesiastes chapter 5 and pick it up at verse 13. He says, "I've seen a grievous evil under the sun, wealth hoarded to the harm of its owners, or wealth lost through some misfortune, so that when they have children there is nothing left for them to inherit. Everyone comes naked from their mother's womb, and as everyone comes, so they depart. They take nothing from their toil that they can carry in their hands. This too is a grievous evil. As everyone comes, so they depart. And what do they gain since they toil for the wind? All their days they eat in darkness with great frustration, affliction, and anger." Is the search for meaning to be found in the accumulation of wealth? Well, you'd think so. Why would you think so? Well, our society just measures everything by wealth. You look at the news every night, and each episode finishes with a look at the dollar, a look at the stock exchange, a look at international markets, a look at how we're going with our banking, with interest rates. We tend to measure ourselves, and our society tends to measure itself as a whole in economic terms. So therefore, if you've got more money, if you've got more houses, if you've got more investments, if you have a bigger income, if you've got more to show for life, then surely your life must be more satisfying. This is what life must be about. But no, because for all that money can buy, there's so much that it can't. It can't buy happiness. It can't buy good relationships with other people. And more significantly than all those things, it cannot buy you out of the one problem that each and every one of us will face, and that is death. You see, wealth can be hoarded to the harm of those who hoard it. And we've seen that, what Ecclesiastes describes. It just happens. People who are accumulating things for themselves, and they are impacted psychologically, emotionally, their relationships are destroyed, they become a miser, they become absolutely locked into their self-obsession with things. A bit like the picture, I think, in A Christmas Carol, the Scrooge character. The Scrooge character becomes incredibly unpleasant. He's so out of touch with those around about him, and particularly out of touch with the needs of those around about him. And we see that, don't we? We see people who are absolutely wealthy beyond description, with no regard for those around about them. And there's a lesson there for us, I think. But the big lesson in these verses is to contemplate where you come from and where you're going. What you have when you enter this life and what you'll take with you when you leave. And the reality is you come into the world with nothing and you will leave with nothing. You come in naked, you'll leave naked. From dust you are, and to dust you will return. Ecclesiastes sees this as incredibly unsatisfying. It doesn't last. It's like a mist or a vapour, and then it's gone. It's not permanent. It's not where the substance of life is to be found. You may accumulate many things in this life, but you can't take any of them with you. The Business Review Weekly's Top 200 magazine is one of the most popular magazines sold every year, where it lists the wealthiest people in our society, the wealthiest business owners and mining magnates, those who own the dot-coms, those who are in control of the media, those who are the super uber rich. But each year, not only does it publish the list of the wealthiest people, it also records a list of those who have died in the previous 12 months. And I've committed to memory what every single one of those people who has died in every single Business Review Weekly has left behind. Everything. That's right. Everything. You can't take it with you. When you're lying on a slab in the morgue, you might have been worth trillions in this life. You may have had nothing but the clothes on your back. Doesn't matter in the end. You can't take it with you. You see, to live our lives for the accumulation of possessions is to play a fool's game. And it's a dangerous game because it can lead us into a false sense of security. See, I think if I've got enough money in the bank, if I've paid off my mortgage, if I've got superannuation that will provide for my retirement, then I'll be okay. I'll be secure. Friends, the current circumstances in our world ought to put pay to that. The reality is people have lost their jobs in huge numbers. People are losing their investments. The price of shares and stocks is plummeting. We need to recognise the fact that what we have doesn't determine who we are, and there's no security to be found in the things that we have. My grandparents had a lot of money invested in one particular building society, the Pyramid Building Society. You may or may not have heard of it, but you wouldn't have heard of it today because it went bust and they lost their savings. During the global financial crisis of 10 to 12 years ago, people lost huge amounts of their savings. People's whole superannuation was under threat, and some came out of it with nothing much to show for it. In fact, there were dreadful stories of people literally jumping off buildings because their lives had come to the point where they thought that they were worth nothing because they had lost everything that they were clinging onto in this life. That's why I think Jesus says it's harder for a rich person to enter the kingdom of heaven than it is for a camel to go through the eye of a needle. And don't play around with that image. It's not that there's some kind of low gate in the Middle East called the eye of a needle, and if the camel stoops it can get underneath. No, it's talking about taking an animal bigger than a horse and squeezing it through a tiny little gap that you thread a thread through. In other words, you can't do it. And Jesus is making the point that it's our wealth that will keep us from God. If we're trusting in our wealth, then we're not trusting in God. For the rich, in our self-assured, self-made security, there's the deep threat that we think that we've got it all and we don't need anything else. It's a dangerous place, Australia. It's a dangerous place to live where all of our needs are basically met because we can think that, well, we don't need anything else. We don't need God. But then one day we will die and leave it all behind. And I want to ask you, what are you trusting in? What are you depending on? Where is your security? What do you think your life is all about? What makes you somebody? Is it your wealth? Is it the striving after things? Or is it knowing that you are one who's been made in the image of God and that God wants to have a relationship with you and has made that possible through Jesus?